Hello and welcome to another episode of Two Guys and a Chainsaw. I'm Todd.
And I'm Craig.
This week we again go to our request bin and randomly pulled out a request from Jennifer for Cellar Dweller. Jennifer, thank you so much for this request. I think it's been a while since you requested this, so happy to get to it. And, you know, this is a movie I'd never even heard of before, actually. Probably because it's one of, I don't know, like a million Charles Band produced horror films. I feel like you could just have a podcast on this guy's output alone and it would keep you busy.
Oh, easy.
For forever, pretty much. And they're kind of recognizable too, and to be honest. I mean, they all have a similar production value, similar sort of standard and quality for special effects, and often use many of the same actors bouncing around there. So, Cellar Dweller. I hadn't heard of it before. This was my first time seeing it. How about you, Craig?
My first time seeing it, I don't recall. I mean, it's a very catchy title, but I don't recall ever having heard of it, and nothing was familiar, aside from a couple of the actors, a few of the actors, actually. But no, nothing was familiar, and honestly, I was not looking forward to watching this. Our text conversation for this week went something like this. You texted me, okay, should we do movie A or Cellar Dweller? And I said, well, I watched the first 10 minutes of movie A, and it was so bad I turned it off. But I'm not really interested in Cellar Dweller either. And you wrote back, okay, so Cellar Dweller it is.
It's like, I guess in retrospect, it sounds a lot like a parent giving options to his child, right? Like, do you want the broccoli or the green beans? I don't want either. All right, you're getting broccoli.
So I wasn't looking forward to it, but I try not to read spoilers usually in advance, but I do a little bit of research beforehand to see, when it was made, what it's rated, how long it is, who's in it, who the director is, who wrote it, that kind of stuff. The director I didn't recognize, but then when I went back through his films, and he has worked, I think, more in special effects, I think.
Yes.
But he has directed a handful of movies, and one of those is Troll, which I love. I love that movie.
Mm-hmm.
And kind of just looking at images of the monster from this movie, I'm like, okay, I can see how this, maybe it's going to be like Troll, and that's fun. And it was written, he wrote it under a pseudonym, but it was written by Don Mancini, and I like Don Mancini too. He is the guy behind
all the Chucky movies.
However many of those movies there are now, 6 or 7, and now there's going to be a television series with, all Don Mancini's behind it, and the actors from the franchise are on board. And so I like Don Mancini. I'm like, okay, this is going to be all right. And it's only an hour and 18 minutes long. Woohoo!
I thought that was pretty much how I sold it to you in the beginning. I said, hey, it's only an hour 18.
Yeah. So I went into it thinking, all right, this could be okay. And then I started watching it, and the opening scene has Jeffrey Combs in it. Jeffrey Combs is the guy from Reanimator. Very recognizable face. I'm like, all right, okay, on board.
Mm-hmm.
But I have to say that ultimately, this is one of the worst movies I've ever seen.
Oh, really? You would say
it's
that?
Horrible.
After all we've been through.
It is horrible. The thing that's the worst about it is the acting. The acting in this movie is some of the worst acting that I've ever seen. Oh, it's so bad.
Worst? Oh, come on. The worse than Witch Trap and Witchboard?
Yes. Maybe not Witch Trap. Maybe not Witch Trap.
God, no.
Oh,
God, no, not worse than Witch Trap. That's my gold standard.
Comparable.
I didn't actually think the acting was that bad. I mean, I thought it was
my God, Todd, it was terrible.
It was on par.
The main girl was horrible.
Yeah, but it's kind of on par for these movies. I mean, you don't expect A-level acting in most of these films, and compare maybe just because I've seen Witch Trap. Witch Trap is unbelievably bad. It's like I don't want to insult community theater because you and I are both quite heavily involved in community theater, but that Witch Trap was like community theater acting if I'd ever seen it. And so I think pretty much any movie that's even notches above it, I'm like, okay, I'll give it a pass.
Oh my God. Yeah, except like one of the women in the movie is getting killed by this big monster, and she's just running around her room like very nonchalantly, and like this thing is chasing her, and she goes, "Oh my God, oh dear!" Like, who says that? Like,
Yeah. There's
so
no,
maybe some of it's the writing too.
there's no real emotion in this at all, right? You don't ever get a sense that people are ever actually reacting convincingly to anything that's going on around them. You know, I will grant you that. Like, the whole movie is just sort of like, it's so simple. It's like a simple kind of enterprise, and it's short, and there's not much substance there. It's a cool concept, I think. I mean, I got really on board with the concept from the beginning just because it tapped into some of my loves. I mean, the opening scene, like you said, with Jeffrey Combs in it, is a guy who's drawing a comic, and it takes place 30 years ago, 1985, so that would be 1955. And at this time in history, if you're a comic book fan, you may know was the time that horror comics were big and booming.
Yeah.
And none other than William Gaines, the man who behind Mad Magazine. Mad Magazine got its start around this time too, as a comic book, published by the same company, EC Comics, Entertaining Comics. They put out Tales from the Crypt, The Vault of Horror, The Haunt of Fear, crime suspense stories, and all of these Twilight Zone-y type comic books that caused a huge stir and riled up parents and were the subject of... They had to go in front of Congress and talk about how their comics weren't causing juvenile delinquency. There was a book that came out by a psychologist called Seduction of the Innocent. And anyway, it kind of forced these comic books off the shelf. But Mad Magazine did end up surviving and ended up becoming their mainstay and bread and butter and kept them going. The thing is, like, they were great. These comics, every single one of them had kind of a twist ending to them. And then, of course, you know, Twilight Zone came shortly thereafter, around the same time. Tales from the Crypt TV series, and so everybody kind of knows what we're talking about here. But if you've never gone back and actually seen these comic books, and I was obsessed with the reprints. I think it was in the early 90s, late 80s maybe. A company got a hold of all the original artwork and issued reprints of these. So I own so many of them, and I go back to them a lot. There were great artists in here, just drawing excellent, excellent art. And that's what this guy's doing. He is drawing a horror comic. In fact, it's taken from the EC Comics directly. The comic he's drawing is called Cellar Dweller. It's the same style. It's the same, what the covers all look like. And even in the corner is a little badge that says EC. So I was like, oh, this is awesome. And you very quickly understand he's drawing this comic. And as he's drawing it, he's referring to this book that's obviously, you know, it's your standard Necronomicon-y type book, ancient book, bound in leather with strange incantations in it, and he's using it for inspiration to draw this comic, which is of a big kind of demon-looking, hairy, werewolf-y type figure with a pentagram on his chest attacking a woman who's got most of her clothes ripped off. Mm-hmm. And as he's doing this, you see flashes of some of the stuff he's drawing actually being there in real life, or in our case, we kind of realize appearing in real life. And so the conceit is that he brings this monster, this creature to life through his artwork, through his comic book, because of the curse or whatever that this book, you know, has kind of brought to it. So the things he draws become real.
Right. Like he draws it, and then he, like, you know, references this satanic book with the pentagram on the front, and he opens the book to try to find the dialogue or whatever the word bubble is going to be above the monster or whatever. And he opens this book to this particular page, and he reads one page, and it's something like evil can only exist when man allows it to, or something like that. And then on the other page, it says, basically the premise is that by giving this demon or whatever it is, he says it's like part werewolf, part vampire, part beast, part ghost. Like, it's this crazy thing.
It's everything.
Everything, right. By giving it form, even a two-dimensional form, he wills it into existence. And that's exactly what happens. Like, the exact scene that he's drawn of this woman being attacked manifests directly behind him. But this is another thing. I understand that these movies aren't going for intellectual stimulus. I get that. And honestly, I love those comics too. I was a huge fan of Tales from the Crypt, the HBO series, when I was a kid. And I think that this movie would have made an excellent half-hour episode of that show.
Yes.
That you expected those episodes to be over the top and campy and silly and fun. And I think that if this were condensed into 30 minutes and you knew that's what you were getting into, it would be a lot more fun. I think this is just drawn out a little bit. The other thing that was hilarious to me is there's this, Satanic book, it's this great big huge leather-bound book, but every time anybody opens it, which happens 3 or 4 times, they open to the exact same page and read the exact same words over and over and over again. Like, there are really only 2 pages to this book.
Well, it's where the bookmark is. Come on. It's the most interesting page in the book, so it's the only one worth reading. The other stuff is just, recipes for casseroles and stuff. But yeah, you're right. It's hilarious. I mean, there's a ton of hilarious stuff like this in the movie. And one issue I had with the movie, and by the way, I was prepared to come into this discussion saying exactly what you did. As a 30-minute Tales from the Crypt episode, this would have been par for the course.
Yeah.
At 1 hour and 18 minutes, it's already stretching it. Beyond that simple premise, it doesn't really have anywhere interesting to go.
Right.
And so that's the problem, right? There's no special twist. There's no whatever. You see what's happening right in the beginning, and it happens, and it just happens over and over again until the main characters finally find a way to confront it.
Right.
And a part of it, I think, is the writing. The fact that there is no build. There is nowhere for everybody to go or anything interesting happening. But then that causes perhaps the acting to be rather flat because they've got nothing really to react to. It's a very plotty movie. Mm-hmm. And so, yeah, it's just you watch a series of events unfold exactly how you expect them to unfold. They're all pretty much the same.
Yeah.
This guy, eventually his way of destroying the beast is to burn the pages. That was actually really humorous that he's got these pages in his hand. He lights them on fire and the beast starts to flame up and he stands there. And then he just kind of lowers the pages onto where he's also has some other pages, and then something spilled, like paint thinner or whatever, turpentine spilled across the floor, and that lights up. And he seems almost nonplussed at the fact that also his entire place is burning up around him. Like, there's no urgency for him to spring up and get the hell out of there. He just kind of like stares at the floor and the fire around him the way he was staring at the monster burning up in front of him, and it consumes him too.
And that, that's the setup, and then it jumps to 30 years later after a very long, very low rate credit sequence over some comic cells. I mean, the comic cells themselves are fine.
They look good.
It looks like, I made it on my Dell
Windows
from
Movie
like
Maker.
1989. Yeah, like it looks horrible. Yeah. But another funny thing to me was like it's an inferno. Like he and the beast both die in this inferno, and like that's the legend. Like actually, what the legend ends up being is that he, the artist, went mad, and because they found his body and this woman's body, the woman that had been killed by the monster, they find him and the woman's body, so they think that he went mad and that he killed her, which of course we don't know, but. Later on, not much later on, characters go down into the basement and nothing burned up.
Nothing burned.
What?
It's hilarious. It was a mystical fire.
Well, a mystical fire, or everything in that basement was made of like asbestos or something because nothing burned.
Oh, maybe that's why they're forbidden from going down in there.
Yeah,
asbestos.
Maybe.
It's more about asbestos, a basement, than it is about any curse.
Okay, so our main character is Whitney, played by Deborah Ferrantino. I didn't look her up. Was she in anything notable?
She looked familiar. She's in a lot of television, actually.
She's
Quite
very pretty.
Yeah.
She's very pretty. She's got big 80s hair in parts of the movie, but like your mom's big 80s hair. Not like Linnea Quigley big 80s hair.
Yeah, what are you saying about my mom, huh?
Fine. My mom's big 80s hair. And, of course, you've got the conceit of the taxi driver, like, warning her, like, oh, there's been lots of stories about this place, murders and weirdos and blah, blah, blah. But, she's not deterred. It's now the Throckmorton Institute for the Arts. And it's like a commune of artists. And though it was a very clear day on the taxi ride, as soon as she gets out of the car, it's dark and storming.
Yeah.
And she goes inside and meets the, what would you call her? The leader, I guess, of this place.
There's apparently a board of directors, which we never see, but she would be, I guess, the director of the enterprise. Yeah. Beholden to the board. Yeah.
Right. Mrs. Briggs. And I liked her, but I didn't look up her picture on her IMDb profile is old Hollywood, and she's stunningly gorgeous. Here, she's an older woman, and a little, like, heavier, as we all get when we're older.
This is hilarious, Craig. She's Yvonne DiCarlo, and she was Lily Munster on The Munsters. I
know. I'm saying I looked her up after, and
okay.
I was like, oh, okay, I love her.
I love her after all.
Yeah, I loved The Munsters when I was a kid. I just thought that was the greatest show.
And she's been in 1,000 things too, by the way. She has a filmography that's insane.
She has a very strong presence, even in her later years, and she did other stuff in her later years, too. She was in American Gothic, which I've actually never seen, but I was always intrigued by the cover art. But anyway, she greets Whitney, and it's apparent from the beginning that she doesn't like her. And she's pretty outwardly insulting and tells her that she thinks that what Whitney does. Whitney is also a comic book artist and illustrator. Whitney tells her that she's a huge fan of Cellar Dweller and that she wants to make a new comic inspired by it, but Mrs. Briggs isn't impressed at all. And she takes her around the house. This was so weird to me.
Mm-hmm.
She takes her around the house and she's like, oh, this door will be of interest to you. This is the door to the cellar where your hero, did his work and killed people or whatever. She's like, but it's totally off limits. And then Mrs. Briggs walks away and Whitney immediately goes down there.
Well, she imagines going down there.
Yeah.
Right?
But I was really confused because she goes down there and everything's clean and stark white and there are marble statues and stuff. And there's a woman tied to a table and then there's a zombie axe murderer. And I was like, what is happening?
That was weird, right? That didn't make any sense. That was a total non sequitur. It was supposed to be, I guess, just a vivid mixture of images from the incident that had happened before. It's like the same girl with her torn off clothes, but then the zombie axe murderer kind of comes from nothing.
Well, and I wondered, he's dressed like Jeffrey Combs was in the first scene, but
that's what it was supposed
I'm pretty
to be.
sure it wasn't Jeffrey Combs.
And why would he be a zombie axe murderer at this point? But it did get us our quote of at least 4 boobs within the first 10 minutes. So I think that was more
true.
the purpose of that scene.
Not terribly stimulating, though, I have to say. Those are boobs.
It's a low budget film. You get what you pay for.
Yeah, it's true. Then then she continues to follow Mrs. Briggs, and they meet some more people who live there. They walk into the kitchen, and Lisa, played by Miranda Wilson, who again did lots and lots of TV, soaps, Days of Our Lives, I think, is where she got her start, but lots of soaps and lots of TV. She's sprawled out seductively on the kitchen table. And I was like, what? Why? Like, sit in a chair. That is disgusting. That's where you eat. Like, cause she wasn't like in her underwear, but she was like in a negligee or something.
She was like mixing something up in a bowl.
I don't know what she was doing.
Like oatmeal or something.
She apparently is a performance artist, and then Phillip is sitting at the table, and I kind of maybe got the impression that maybe Lisa was on the table because maybe she was modeling for him, even though Phillip does abstracts. Now, Phillip is played by Brian Robbins, who, if you watched any television at all in the 80s, you will completely recognize. He was on every 80s sitcom. Every single one, he was on it.
Yeah. Always a guest character who came in at maybe the very special episode, you know. Uncle Bill, who was an alcoholic or something, comes in, that kind of thing.
Well, he was like a teenager, so he was always, you know, the love interest for the teenage girl in like one episode, or he would do a 3-episode arc, but he's super recognizable. Now, he's a huge executive. Like, his resume, like, he has produced so many things. He's the president of like children's entertainment for one of the biggest conglomerates in Hollywood. Like, hugely successful at this point, apparently. But he paints abstracts, and he's immediately enamored with Whitney. Mrs. Briggs shows Whitney to her room, I guess, or her studio or something, and I thought, just out of the corner of my eye, I looked over Whitney's shoulder, and there was the poster for Reanimator, which I thought was hilarious.
It was.
And as it turns out, there's imagery from several movies.
Yeah.
Just randomly on the wall. Like, I missed it. I didn't see it, but apparently the troll poster is there somewhere. I'm almost positive I saw the image from the cover art of Dolls, with the doll with no eyes, like holding her own eyeballs.
Oh, yeah.
There are several throughout, which, for a horror fan, again, if this were an episode of Tales from the Crypt, it would be a great episode. But it just feels so padded. Like, there are too many characters. And they're obviously there so that they can be killed later.
Well, it's also trying to be really funny because it presents these artists all. So you mentioned Phillip. You mentioned Lisa, I think. There's another guy we'll meet later called Norman, and another woman named Amanda. And it's making fun of artists. You know, Phillip comes in while Whitney's immediately gotten to work drawing in her studio, and Phillip is immediately in there chatting her up and invites her to come upstairs because they're going to have his gallery critique, which they do every week or something like that. So they go up to critique Phillip's art, which looks like it was drawn by a child. It's like
painting.
Finger painting stuff. And I mean, I appreciated this comedy aspect of it, of portraying these artists, how, to be honest, we often see these kind of artist enclave type things where everybody's, you know, patting each other on the back and trying to out-weird each other and got all these kind of quirky personalities. And, you know, it's sort of like a quirkiness one-upmanship, you know, stereotypical.
It's funny in concept. I just thought it fell super flat. Like,
oh, no. It did. Because they get there and they're looking at the art, and Mrs. Briggs says something serious about this silly painting. And then suddenly a guy springs out, and his name is Norman, and he's got a gun, and he grabs Lisa and says, "Give me that art or I'll shoot her, and I don't think I won't." And Whitney is... Turns out this is just Norman. He does this sort of role play, acting things out because he's a writer, and he's writing the next Raymond Chandler inspired kind of gumshoe story. So,
former private investigator turned like crime writer, detective story writer. And I guess when he gets writer's block, he acts out scenes to try to inspire himself, and everybody else just goes along with it.
Yeah. And it's silly. So half-baked, because this Norman character, I mean, you think, oh, private investigator, is he going to be, kind of like bringing those skills into play in the actual plot of the movie? Later, he's typing things up in his little office, which I thought was so adorable.
Oh my God. On like an old-timey typewriter, and he's got a bottle of whiskey next to him, and he's smoking a cigar, and it's like...
the music is going in the background.
The voiceover of just totally that, cheesy crime novel, detective novel narration. That part did make me smile, just because it was so stereotypical and so silly and so intentional, and I did think it was funny to look at for a second.
It was, yeah, for a second. Well, everything's kind of half-baked, right? It's like, oh, these are kind of funny, cute concepts, but either they're poorly executed or they're there and then they're gone again. Because it turns out there's another woman there named Amanda, and she's doing video projects, video verite type, slice of life type stuff, I guess. That's really silly. But she meets up with Whitney, and they've known each other before. Apparently they were freshmen in art school, first year art school or whatever, and Amanda was known for stealing other people's art and concepts and ideas and stuff, and apparently did one over on Whitney at some point, so they're not very friendly to each other from the get-go. So there's that tension, which Norman overhears. And he overhears it, and he's writing it in his little notebook as he's kind of creeps around and takes notes on things. And so I thought, he would be a kind of a pivotal, integral, the guy who's kind of the brains, who kind of pops in and tries to figure out the mystery of what's going on when things start going on. But he just kind of does a little bit, and then he dies. So, again, it just feels like not very well fleshed out, all of these ideas. And of course, it's just a hodgepodge. It's a crazy, silly hodgepodge of things that don't really go anywhere interesting and aren't even that well executed, right?
Right. No, I mean, there are no stakes. Like, it's just a lineup of goofy characters who are just being lined up to be killed, and eventually they are, and not in particularly interesting ways. Whitney dreams of the beast. It's all just flashback stuff from the first scene that we saw, but she dreams of it, and she wakes up to hear this constant screaming. And she, looks around the house, looks towards the cellar. The screaming's not coming from there. She finally goes outside, and Lisa is just standing, screaming her head off. And when she hears Whitney behind her, she turns around. She's like, "Oh, I'm sorry. Did I wake you?" "Yeah, you did. You were screaming in the middle of the night. Like, what did you think was good?" And she's like, "Oh, I just do this to release my creative imagery or something." Like, okay, in the middle of the night, like.
Oh, and all the others, they're so used to it, they just sleep right through it. Sorry to wake you up.
So dumb. And then they have kind of like we're friends now talk, and right. There are weird sounds from the cellar, and Lisa jokes that it's the ghost of Childress, the comic writer or whatever. But after, Lisa kisses her goodnight on the cheek or whatever, Whitney goes down into the cellar and gets scared by Phillip, and then opens this trunk, which we had actually seen that Childress's Satanic book had fallen into the trunk, and the trunk had fallen shut in all of the commotion before the fire.
Good thing it didn't get burned up, and that somebody had the foresight to lock it, I guess, after that incident with a padlock.
Well, yeah, but it doesn't even matter, because seriously, nothing is burned.
Yeah,
nothing.
Exactly. Even his wooden drawing table is still there with papers on it.
Comic books on the shelves and stuff. Nothing is burned.
Yeah.
But she finds the Satanic book, and she's all excited. And so the next morning, she convinces Mrs. Briggs to let her work in the cellar. Briggs doesn't like her anyway, but she's like, well, if you let nobody else is using the cellar, and if you let me go down there, it'll open up another spot, and then you can bring in another real artist. And Mrs. Briggs is like, okay, whatever. So then there's a cleaning montage. I don't know that I've ever seen a cleaning montage before.
It was a lame cleaning montage. Consisted entirely of hands dusting things.
Yeah, and my favorite was that it ended on a very lingering shot of presumably Whitney's hand dusting off this marble statue and lingering over its tiny penis. Like,
Yeah.
Why?
I think they're just attempts at humor throughout. Keyword attempts. Yeah. Well, but then, after she decides to let her go down there, she still's got it in for Whitney for some reason. So she calls in Amanda and says, Amanda, I have a little project for you. And so while Whitney is down there drawing, Amanda is up outside one of the basement windows filming her with her video camera.
Obviously. Like,
yeah, like all Whitney has to do is glance
discreetly
up.
at all, right.
Right. But Whitney's, opens the book and decides she's going to use this book to draw a monster. And this book is so great, and so I'm going to use it as inspiration to draw, like, the best monster in the whole world. Phillip is on board with it and all that. She draws it all down.
Well, and she's clearly never seen, people in horror movies have clearly never seen horror movies because, she draws this beast, then she draws a big pentagram on its chest, and then she takes these, like, runes, like, or some old, ancient language that she has no idea what it says, and uses that as its thought or word bubble. So,
for no real good reason.
It's like every group of teenagers or 20-somethings who goes to a cabin in the woods and finds the Satanic book and thinks, what, we should read this aloud.
Yeah. Of course.
Same thing. And so the beast manifests behind her, but something that we didn't mention before is apparently the beast, because I guess it's part ghost, it can also just appear and disappear at will,
right?
So she doesn't realize that she's brought this thing into reality.
I think the beast appears when we need another kill, and then disappears for a lot of boring talking, and then reappears for another boring kill. I mean, it's really how it goes.
Yeah.
Unleashing the beast in this instance is more just like unleashing a nuisance. It's like a cockroach you can't get out of your house. Like it's quiet for a real long while, and then suddenly you see it scurry across the floor, and then it's gone again for a while.
And let's talk about the beast for a second, because honestly, I don't hate the way it looks when it's not moving or talking, because it talks in English. Okay, so when it's not moving or talking, I don't mind the way it looks. It is very reminiscent of the creature effects from Troll.
Oh,
very
Ghoulies.
Similar. Uh-huh.
I mean, the same guy worked on the director of this movie, who you mentioned, came up through special effects, but basically he was Roger Corman's guy, the head of his special effects division for years. This was his very first directing project, and he claims he was the first person to make the jump from special effects to the director's chair. I don't know about that, but that's what you can see on his IMDb page.
So it looks okay. It really looks okay, but it's obviously a guy in a suit, which, cool. That's fine. I don't know if it was limitations of the suit, but it barely moves. Like, it pretty much just stands there.
Always.
It has some movement in its face, but not a whole lot. And so it'll stand there. It might take a couple of steps towards somebody to kill them. God, honestly, I barely even remember the way that it kills people. Like, I think it just grabs them and rips them apart.
It's a lot of close-up shots is what it is, and hands when you don't see the rest of the creature. It really is. This is a movie that, it relies on close-ups, and it's trying really hard to give you a good special effects beast. So it lingers on, shots of his face and shots of it chomping down on arms and legs and spitting out blood and swallowing eyeballs and things. But it's still just that one shot, right? You don't very often get a full body shot of him, and you certainly don't get much movement.
Every time, like, he rips the bodies apart and you see kind of very quick close-ups of like limbs being torn apart, and then afterwards it always eats them, and it, like you said, it's super close-up shots of this thing's mouth all covered in blood, like munching and crunching, and it's the same every time, to the point where I kind of suspect that they just used the same footage for every kill.
Perhaps.
Or they shot 5 minutes of this footage and then just cut it up and used it for every kill, because it looks exactly the same every time.
Yeah, I think you're right. Same lighting setup, same everything. Nothing really in the background. It's just all about the creature, and kind of mostly in half darkness. It reminded me a little bit. The look of the creature reminded me a little bit of if you took that little goblin, the genie or whatever from Sorority Babes and the Slimeball Bolorama, and just made him a little bigger and put a bunch of hair on him. That's kind of how he looked and moved.
I guess, let's see, Whitney confronts Amanda about being Snoopy, and again Norman overhears this, so he knows there's tension between them. And then Amanda sneaks down into the basement, finds a copy of Cellar Dweller, one of those other horror comics, takes it, and then in Whitney's style recreates it and signed Whitney's name to it, and she's setting her up. She makes this video where she accuses, apparently she's going to give to the board of directors or whatever, that accuses Whitney of plagiarizing, whatever. I mean, Amanda's just a bitch. Like, that's the only characteristic that she has. She's a conniving bitch.
Yeah.
Meanwhile, Whitney is down in the cellar, and she draws Amanda being attacked, and it happens exactly as she's drawing it, down to environmental changes. Like, Whitney draws a cell that shows Amanda going to reach for the door, but there's no doorknob. And we see in the scene, Amanda reaches for the door, and the doorknob disappears, complete with like a bloop sound effect. Like,
and a little animated, wisp over it. Yeah.
It's very, very silly, and that's when she's getting attacked. Oh my God! Oh dear! And Whitney draws her saying, "Won't anybody help me?" And so she says it pretty much just like that. It's all horrible acting. The effects are exactly as we just described. And when Whitney's done drawing it, the last cell is the monster who says out loud, "Who's next?" And so we hear the monster say that.
So she's kind of set everything in motion. And from here on out, the monster pops in and kills people one by one. And at this time, it's like the pages of the comic book manifest themselves.
Yes.
And so I feel like, again, it's kind of a cool concept. I liked it. I like the idea. Let's put it that way. And it was interesting then how it allows them to either be stylistic or save a lot of money, whichever you prefer to choose, so that these kill scenes intersperse bits of the cell that are showing what's happening or what is about to happen with what, the actual what's going on. And I actually thought that was good, because some of these would show what was about to happen. And so there was some anticipation there. That bit was pretty clever.
Yes, I agree.
And the artwork's pretty good too. So that's the conceit. And we just see that happen like 3 or 4 more times.
Right. It happens to Norman. Norman is like, investigate, because Amanda's missing. Mrs. Briggs is worried. Nobody else cares because they hate her anyway. But Norman investigates, and he thinks that Whitney killed Amanda for revenge or something. But then he doesn't get to share that theory with anybody, because he immediately gets killed.
Yeah.
And I don't even remember it. Like, I don't.
Well, he's in his investigation, and Amanda's missing, so he goes into Amanda's room and he plays that videotape that she made. And there's a part of the videotape where she's talking directly into the camera, saying, "Oh, Whitney's plagiarizing. This is proof. Yada yada yada." While the monster is rising up behind her and attacks her. So her attack is caught on camera, and that's what he sees. At the same moment, the monster's also rising behind him.
Right.
And he turns around and he gets it. So, he gets his head knocked right off.
Oh, that's right.
That was cool.
That was kind of fun. I forgot about that.
Yeah. Flies across the room, hits the corner and a couple walls. I like that bit. And then Lisa takes a shower.
Well, wait, when did we miss it? Oh, because I jumped to Norman's death. I wanted to at least mention Lisa's performance. Oh, that was one. I want to say unintentional, but I don't even believe that to be true. I believe that this was completely 100% played for comedy, because she's a performance artist, and so like she has her face made up like Ziggy Stardust kind of, and she's in a leotard and tights and maybe a tutu or something, and she's dancing around and she just keeps saying death. And she's got dolls hung up on the wall that are labeled with the names of the people in the house and a balloon above each doll, and she'll pop the balloon and take the doll down and dance around it. Death is sad. And then she'll roll around on the ground, and it's so dumb. It's so dumb. But that part actually really amused me, because I didn't major, but I studied theater in college, and I didn't take it, but Alan did. There was a performance art class, and they would have a showcase at the end of every semester, and it would be literally this type of shit.
This is funny because it's true. This is not a lie.
No, you really honest to God stuff just like this. People going around and blowing out candles, or my performance. This was one of my friends. I hope she never listens to this. I don't think that she will. But one of my friends just sat on a couch and ate a bologna sandwich. That was her performance.
B+. Or baloney.
Oh boy. So that was funny. But then things somehow Whitney, and at this point Phillip is just kind of her little lapdog, and it's all very goofy, but she opens the book to the only page that you can open this book to, right in the middle of it, and reads the same thing that we've seen before. So she figures out, I guess, that the curse is real.
It's a pretty big leap, yeah, but she does. Well, don't they see? She sees papers materialize also in front of her
of Lisa's death,
right?
And it's happening at the same time. It's the movie is cutting back and forth between Whitney coming to these realizations and seeing it appear on the page, and Lisa, and we actually see what's happening to Lisa. And again, of course, put this young, blonde, pretty girl in the shower for no reason, and then just have her oh no, my towel is missing. So I guess I'm just going to have to run around.
Phillip, are you playing around with me again? I'm coming out there.
So silly. And they know that it's happening, but they're too late. I mean, they get to her door as we see her being torn apart and eaten in the exact same way that we've seen everybody else.
Yeah, and so then they kind of run away. They've seen the monster. It kind of chases them slightly. And then the next shot is they're sitting in Mrs. Briggs' office, worried. And they're like, look, we're telling you there's a monster here. What happened between suddenly you guys calmly sitting in her office 2 doors down from where this woman was brutally slaughtered and you saw this giant monster?
Well, I feel like they immediately run to the Cellar again, and Whitney is kind of hysterical, but her acting is so bad, it just looks totally fake. Meanwhile, Phillip is completely unfazed. He's still cracking jokes.
Yeah. Exactly.
And then Whitney, I don't know where this comes from, but I guess because they're all artists, she deduces that the monster feeds on creative energy. So quite literally, it's eating these artists and feeding on their energy. Okay. And they're looking at the illustrations and the monster, and they're again very reminiscent of Troll, these weird lighting effects that look like they were done in post, they're illustrated in these green lights floating around, and the monster's hand burst out through the paper, and it grabs Phillip, and Whitney is knocked to the floor and knocked unconscious, which happens in movies all the time. I've never in my real life just seen anybody, barely fall down and be completely unconscious, but whatever. But when Whitney wakes up, Phillip is just gone. And so she goes to Mrs. Briggs, and Mrs. Briggs is kind of strangely calm about the whole thing, too.
Mm-hmm.
And then I don't even understand what happens here.
Yeah.
Like, Mrs. Briggs walks behind her, like, to get her some tea or something, and she's like, "It's okay, dear. I've been going through some changes, too." And when Whitney turns around, Mrs. Briggs is turning into the monster?
Yeah.
I was confused. I mean, I think that this was just the way that Mrs. Briggs dies. I guess, like, the monster just takes her over, but in the moment, I'm like, was she always the monster?
Oh, interesting. Yeah, I mean, I think the problem is there's no real rules for this, right? It's kind of hard. There's no real consistency, no pattern to follow. The monster just can reappear and manifest itself anywhere it wants, but it chooses to wait a while in between each time. So, it just then. Yeah.
But that leads to my favorite part of this movie.
The end? The credits?
Yes. The monster drags Whitney to the basement, and pages keep appearing, and she's like, throwing things at it for a good 30 seconds, a minute. And eventually she throws a little bottle, and it spills on the page, and the monster is hurt. And so she looks to see what it was that she threw and is now running down the page, and it's fucking whiteout.
Yes.
That is how you defeat this monster. With whiteout.
I know. That was great. And so she just grabs a big bottle and just dumps it all over the page. And, shouldn't that fix it all? I don't understand why that didn't end it.
Well, she should just be done, but instead she dramatically, "Oh, Phillip, I'm so sorry." Like, no tears, like, just the fakest crying you can ever imagine. Meanwhile, the monster's gone. She's defeated. But the way that, she has an idea, like a light bulb goes on in her head. And she draws a page in which Phillip is the hero and defeats the monster and gets the monster chained up to the wall. She does it, and she's done, and she looks at it, and she's waiting for something to happen, and nothing happens, and she's like, "Oh, Phillip, I'm so sorry." And she, like, kisses her fingers and, like, puts it on his face on the page, and from behind her she hears, "That's it? I want a real kiss." And here comes Phillip, all smiles, with the monster chained up again behind him, behind the wall. And I'm like, you stupid bitch. Like,
I know, right?
You got rid of the monster, and then you immediately brought it back. Like,
you drew it again. Like, couldn't you just draw Phillip leaping out of the page and then we're done? Right.
Uh-huh. So she draws everybody back. It's just a scene. There's not even any dialogue or anything of just all of everybody who's died, except, they're just
sofa.
sitting on the couch, like, having tea, like high tea, like they're all dressed to the nines.
I know. And then Whitney and Phillip peek around the corner just to see that they're there, and then look at each other and wink and smile, and then go back around the corner. Mm-hmm. It looks so goofy. It's like that. Oh, we got to get this scene in. They see it. Okay. They go downstairs. But the monster's still there, right?
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And why doesn't she just white him out again?
Right. Well, she's like, the way that Childress defeated him was by burning him up, so that's what I'm going to do too. And she tells Phillip to grab a metal wastebasket, and he does, and she crumples up all the pages and throws them in and starts burning them, and it works. The monster catches on fire. But then, as we are seeing things burn in the trash can, all of a sudden, it's the picture of Phillip, and it starts to burn, and she's like, "Oh, no!" And she looks at him, and he bursts into flames and starts screaming. And then we see all the other people upstairs. We see their pictures start to burn and they start screaming too. And it almost seemed implied to me that it wasn't maybe even really them that she brought back, because as they're burning, they kind of look like the monster, or like monsters like the monster. Anyway, it ultimately doesn't matter because they just all burn up, and Phillip is the last one to burn up, and she turns around and sees on display a big drawing of the beast with the thought bubble over its head that it speaks aloud. I mean, the beast isn't there anymore, but we hear the voiceover read, "Wherever there is imagination, I will dwell." And then the monster's not dead, and it attacks Whitney, and we just hear her scream, "No!" Cut to credits.
Well, I will say that I wasn't expecting it, but I thought, again, the movie's very inconsistent in the way it portrays itself. There's not a continuity to how all this seems to operate. But when she was throwing all the pages in there and burning them up to kill the monster, I was going through my head, wait a minute, if that destroys the monster, wouldn't it also destroy the people? And so when the people got destroyed, I was like, oh, wow, that's actually kind of cool. And then at the end, it just ended up hokey. But as a 30-minute, this would be very typical, though, for like a Tales from the Crypt kind of episode. And
yes. Oh, absolutely.
As you said earlier, if this movie had been 30 minutes instead of an hour and 18, it probably would have gone down better. I mean, still wouldn't have helped the acting or anything, but the fact that they sort of had to stretch it out made a lot of it very nonsensical and forced them to really fill it up with a bunch of silliness.
Yeah, and Tales from the Crypt, of course there are also the movie anthologies based on these comics, Tales from the Dark Side, Creepshow, and I really like those too. But I loved Tales from the Crypt, especially because it was very tongue-in-cheek. It was constantly winking at you as the audience. And I liked that. And I think that this would have, I would have enjoyed this as an episode of that show, because I would expect this kind of hammy acting and this hammy storytelling. And I don't even want to say that this movie takes itself too seriously. It doesn't.
It doesn't at all.
It's just that it's almost like it just tried too hard. It should have been a half hour. They could have kept Mrs. Briggs. That would have been fine. They could have kept the nemesis, as fodder for the monster. They would have kept the love interest possibly, but they easily could have cut the gumshoe guy. They easily could have cut Lisa, even though I liked her fine, but she, unnecessary. Trim it down, get it to a nice solid 30 minute, give it this, grim ending, which Tales from the Crypt always did, as far as I can remember.
Yep.
And I think I would have liked it. Now, as bad as I thought it was, I didn't walk away from it angry. We have watched some movies that I thought were so bad that I walked away from them pissed. Like, I can't believe I watched that. It was horrible. It was a waste of my time. I didn't walk away from this angry. I just walked away from it thinking it was bad. And that being said, I kind of expected that we would have fun talking about it. And I did have fun talking about it. So,
yeah.
And again, thank you to all of you who send in requests. We've been getting a lot of requests lately, and Todd is usually the one who responds to private messages that we get. And your go-to responses, thank you so much. We'll get it on the request list. And we really do. We keep a request list, but it's long. So if you request something, don't think that we're ignoring you. It may just take us a while to get there because we've had so many requests, but keep them coming, because this is the kind of thing
we wouldn't choose.
No, we never would have chosen this. I never would have watched this. I thought it was a stupid movie, but for the podcast, it's fun to talk about,
And I mean, we've seen, like you said, much stupider movies, and I just kind of shrugged. I mean, again, it kind of was what it was. We've seen movies like this. This is exactly the kind of thing I would have seen on USA Up All Night, and probably would have felt better with a few commercials padding it out, honestly, to break it up,
right.
come back to it, kind of forget how silly the previous scene was. No, I didn't react quite as strongly as you, as far as I wouldn't at all call it the stupidest movie I've ever seen or the worst acting I've ever seen. I just thought it was kind of mediocre all around. Interesting premise. The premise deserved more. But once again, if you had trimmed it, just like you said, to a 30-minute thing, it would have been even more in keeping with the spirit in which I believe it was made, as an homage to these kinds of stories. I got to tip a little bit of my hat to that one as well, because we also see a lot of very uncreative horror films too. Some just guys in different locations, hacking people apart, random weirdos or random silliness. And this had a theme that I thought at least had a little bit of heart behind it, even if it wasn't executed as well. So I did like that. Well, thanks again for listening. As Craig said, if you have a request or you just want to tell us what you thought of this film, please just look us up, Two Guys and a Chainsaw podcast. You can just Google that. You'll find our Facebook page. You'll find our website. You'll find our Twitter feed. Send us a request. We will add it to the list and hopefully get around to it soon. If you enjoyed this podcast, please share it with a friend. And also check us out on YouTube if that's your bag. We have a YouTube channel there as well. Until next time, I'm Todd.
And I'm Craig.
With Two Guys and a Chainsaw.